All right, guys, we're live here with Jake Lawrence, and Jake's trying to connect to my Wi-Fi so he can share this up on his Facebook page.
Try it.
I'm going to try to type it in. So, there you go, Jake.
Thanks, sir.
Look at there, Baitman doing non-bait things. So, if you don't know, Jake is he's a hammer. He won the FLW Coastal Series event last year on Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lakes, actually. So, Jake, you ran from, was it Lake Barkley State Park?
Little River,
all the way to basically Paris?
Yeah, about 10 miles south of Paris, almost to Danville. Not quite to Danville, but it was a haul. I don't, everybody's asked how far that is. I've never actually checked to see. I'm guessing somewhere around 70 or 80 miles, but it would take me about an hour and a half. Unlike most tournaments, it was actually flat, like glass calm, 3 days in a row. The third day of the tournament, I came in about 20 minutes early, and it was rolling 3-footers by the time I got my fish in the bag. So
you're speaking of rough. I was on Kentucky Lake today. I had a rough day fishing, but about 1 o'clock, she started blowing out of the north. And I don't think it mattered what kind of boat you're in, but it was tough. So, anyways, guys, make sure you give this video a thumbs up and share it if you're new to the channel. Hit the subscribe button. So what Jake's going to do tonight, he's going to explain the basics of offshore fishing, not just ledge fishing, and go through some baits and stuff. And then he's got some screenshots from his Humminbird electronics. He's kind of going to dissect with you. So if you have any questions or anything, make sure you drop them in here. As always, if you want to make sure your comment does get seen, hit that super chat button for the donation. That helps out here on the channel, getting new equipment, get some new baits in to show you guys, all that stuff. Thank you, Chad Zone. Appreciate it. Before Jake gets started, I did get a little new bait in that's kind of really hot, and this is the new Megabass Mag Draft Freestyle. So what's cool about this, it doesn't have the harness system from the old Megabass Mag Draft, but it's got a little split belly here, and there's a slot up top, so you can rig this on your favorite swim bait hook. Me personally, I'm an owner beast guy. You can put the spin on the bottom or not, and you can also put a jig head on it for you guys that like fishing way out deep. So it's going to be hot in here, so we're going to try to move along pretty quickly, not keep you guys too late. So CRG Fishing wants to know, what's a good Pickwick ledge fishing bite? You just got back from Pickwick, Jake. Guy's going to go down to Pickwick. What's he going to catch him on?
It's funny. Each school, they're getting a ton of pressure at Pickwick right now. The word is out how good it is, and there's an unbelievable amount of boats down there, even during the middle of the week. I did guide trips periodically throughout this week based on the weather, and I was amazed at how many boats were out there. So it was funny. One school, you could get them fired up on a drop shot and catch a few on a crankbait. Some schools would only bite a drop shot.
Right.
Of course, I on the standard trimmer head with a 5 or 7 inch cast eight jerky J, caught a bunch that way. Thursday was some of the most incredible offshore fishing I've ever seen. Now, we only had like 18.5 pounds, but we literally caught 100 bass not throwing a drop shot. I mean, it's one thing to go to Pickwick. Pickwick, for the guys that have never been there, is full of 12 to 14 inch bass. I mean, it's you ride over a school. An average size school's got 200 to 500 bass in it, and 90% of them are little ones. But there's always a few mixed in that are good quality. But it was interesting that most of the schools, and you'll actually see in the screenshots we're going to go in here in just a little while, these bass they're set up like bass are supposed to, but they're not in the right places, and a lot of them are looking, they don't quite look like they should set up. And I wish, we kind of did this on a little short notice. I was going to try to get some screenshots on Wednesday with the Lowrance, and of course the trip I did on Thursday, I had a Humminbird. My trip on Wednesday got canceled due to weather, so I just have the Humminbird screenshots at the moment. But it's interesting to see how these fish look a little different. I personally can tell that these fish have gotten a lot of pressure just based on the way that they're set up and the way that they look. But It was unbelievable. I am by no means complaining about the fishing pressure. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. We've all learned to deal with it. And there's so many bass at Pickwick right now, it doesn't matter.
It's like Kentucky Lake was 10 years ago.
Exactly.
You know, unfortunately, I hate to say this, they got something coming.
Yep, they do.
It's called carp. And but one thing Pickwick has that Kentucky Lake doesn't have, and I don't want to touch on this too much, is it has grass.
It does.
And that gives the bait fish, the bass, and all that somewhere to hide. And from my experience, those Asian carp, they don't really like that grass.
They don't. It's funny. And I'll be honest with you, I love fishing grass. But for my guide trips and when I'm doing these electronic trips, it actually makes it difficult because here in about 3 or 4 weeks, the big ones are going to learn not to stay in these schools, and they're all going to go in the grass. Now, on my electronic trips, we're simply looking for schools of bass. Doesn't matter if they're that long or that long. We just need to see bass.
That's right.
So it's okay, but it is somewhat frustrating.
Yeah.
You get on into the summer, and it's like, I know where the big ones are, but we can't see them. We can't go fish for them, you know.
Right. Well, let's see. I got a question here. Here it says, guys, it's from Aaron Gillison. I have a new Lowrance Gen 3 on my new-to-me boat. Turn it on, comes on, and flashes, and it's like gone. Where would you start to resolve issue? Where would you start to resolve the issue? So it comes on, flashes, and then turns off, if that's correct.
Yeah, what do you mean, if you can specify, what do you mean by gone? Do you mean it's shutting back off, powering back off, or I need a little more detail there. And also, what battery are you? What cranking battery do you have?
See, I'm good with computers, and I'm pretty good on a graph, but I don't know all this stuff. If my graph goes out, I go take it to somebody and say go mess with it.
Yeah.
It says it's a black screen.
Black screen, but the unit is still on, correct? I don't know if you mean black screen as in powered down
or go to standby mode. I've seen them where they want to hang in standby mode.
Yeah, it almost kind of sounds like a power issue, but
I'm thinking it may be my cranking battery. I have to restart it.
Yeah, that's it's a good possibility. I always, I'll be honest with you. Of course, this time of year for the next 2 to 3 months, super busy guiding. But I'll be honest, keeping these electronics going year-round, or keeping these electronics going is a year-round job. I mean, I bet I've answered 25 questions from various people who are having issues just today. I mean, it's a never-ending process. So, electronics, the technology is getting incredible these days, but it's somewhat frustrating because it's hard to keep it all going and operating. But I'm more than happy to help anybody. And I'll give, here in just a little bit, I'll be more than happy to give everyone my cell phone number and my email. I'm most always available. I try not to answer any phone calls during guide trips just because I wouldn't be able to do the trip. But I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And
I'll drop your. I'll type it in the chat. What's your email, Jake?
It's J Lawrence, Lawrence, outdoors 24/7 @gmail.com.
All right, so I'll drop that in there, and of course you can get on Facebook, and it's you can find Jake. He has his own little page, but also Malone's Marine Guide Service.
Guide Service, correct.
So
I'm actually just getting that. I'll be honest, I'm kind of slacking on that. I've been so busy. I posted a time or two on there, but I really need to step up. Baxter needs to stay on me about that. I'm bad when fishing season or ledge season gets here, and I get super busy. I am wake up, take the kids to school, get on the lake, get off at dark, come back, cook the kids something to eat, get a shower, and go to bed.
We're busy guys.
That's right.
So maybe this will help you. I've been discussing this. I've never said this on YouTube or anything, but I'm thinking of starting a media company in angler social media and company management as far as stuff like that. So maybe I can just run your social media for you.
That'd work perfect.
It's something I think I'm pretty good at, and I've had a lot of people ask me, and if I get enough people, that's just a starting point. And but let's see. So,
and I'm not trying to jump off subject, but
no,
these lights are magnifying my sunglass tan line. Like, I can't stop staring at it, and it's my own. It's terrible.
Yeah, I should brought a paper towel. It's hot in the bait room. It's like 90 degrees outside.
It is.
And for this to get good, nice video, we've got to crank these lights up in here.
Yeah, it's horrible. You should see my wedding pictures. My wife begged me from the moment that we were engaged. She said, "Please take your sunglasses off for our wedding." I said, "Absolutely not."
So we got a couple little questions here, Jake, and then we're going to get into some specific baits, and then we're going to talk about. I got some Navionics to pull up. We're going to talk about what offshore structure we like to fish and how to identify offshore holes. Mitchell asks, with running 2 different brands, do you get interference between them? Now, like my buddy Hunter Mills, he runs a Helix 12 and then HDS 12 side by side.
So I have several customers, and I actually did this 2 years ago on my boat, where I ran both Lowrance and Humminbird. With the new Mega imaging, what I found is as long as you're running different frequencies, there's not much interference. You have to be careful. I always encourage, regardless of what transducer, what unit the transducer is going to, you want to keep those at least 16 inches apart. Now, every boat is a little different. Sometimes you have to mount them to the jack plate. Sometimes you can mount them directly to the transom. Every model or make is a little different, but you need to try to get them as far apart as possible.
So I'll ask you the $1 million question, Lowrance or Humminbird?
You know, I'm not brand loyal. I follow the technology. Right now, we're kind of in this predicament where Lowrance has got the down imaging cornered, and I'm afraid they're always going to have that. They've got a patent, to my knowledge, I may be totally wrong, may get bashed for this, but to my knowledge, Lowrance actually patented the downward facing transducer, or the beam shoots directly out of the bottom of the transducer, and they have that patented so that everyone, basically what Humminbird and Garmin and Ray Marine, all the other brands, what they've had to do is they're taking, on their down imaging, they're taking the image, it's shooting out of the side of the transducer, and they're actually blending what's directly below you together. So that's why it's really interesting when you run a Lowrance and a Humminbird. What you see on one unit is not always what you see on another.
Right.
It's interesting. It's really neat.
Well,
but to answer that question, Humminbird right now has the side imaging cornered, and Lowrance, of course, has the down imaging. Now, I'll be honest with you, the Garmin Panoptix Live Scope is unreal. And without giving too much away, is absolutely the future of bass fishing, offshore bass fishing on the Tennessee River. I've got a few little sneaky deals I'm working on with that. But we shall see.
I'm going to get down with Jake, and we're going to do some filming at Pickwick pretty soon, I hope. And possibly if these fish ever really get out offshore on this lake, they're getting there, but you got to hunt hard for them.
You do. You've got to put your time in. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really impressed, and I know there's a ton of bad publicity going on about Kentucky Lake here in the last year or so. We're certainly in a decline.
Right.
But this year
and I'm bad about it. I'm just so upset and heartbroken about it.
It is. But nothing's ever as good as it was, for that, 5-year period. You can't expect the lake to stay that good. I have this year, on my trips, I have started to catch little ones, those 10 to 14 inchers. Just about every day I catch several of them. And that's encouraging. We've got... there's light at the end of the tunnel, in other words. I'm seeing something for the future. For the last couple of years, the population has dwindled. It's gotten smaller and smaller. The population that we have seems to be that old, mature year class, 4 to 6-year-old class. And they're just getting smart. And there's actually a lot more of them out there than what people think.
Right.
But they don't live where they're supposed to. They don't... It blows my mind. As much as I'm out there, I'll find them most of the time by total accident on some off-the-wall, goofy place that you would never look. I mean, it's just, time out there, you'll eventually run into some. But they're adapting to their environment, both the carp and, most importantly, the pressure that's on them. They just know not to... they get caught 2 or 3 times. They're not going to sit in the same place. So a lot of these big community holes still have a lot of fish that live in the area, but they don't live on what we used to consider the juice, where they're supposed to live.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is cool about YouTube is we got so many anglers that aren't around Kentucky and Tennessee River, I've got guys that watch this. I had a guy from South Korea last week.
That's awesome.
Got people out in California and all that. So, a couple questions. I had some guys asking about Jaints t-shirts. I just dropped a link here in the chat for the Jaints shirts. You can get them up to like 5XL. And in this store, you can get long sleeve, performance, kids shirts, all kinds of stuff. And that goes, the funds on that go help support the channel as well. But I did have a couple crankbait questions. One was, what's the deepest crankbait you throw? And another guy is, have you thrown the man's deep cranks, and do they actually get down to 30+ feet?
Here's my take on crankbaits, whether they dive 6 inches or 60 feet. Whatever they say, you can subtract about 3 feet off of whatever the package says, and that's about what they're going to run. I have not personally thrown the man's. Probably should, because nobody does anymore.
No.
That seems to be the key now, is find something different. But primarily, I'm more on the finessey crankbaits right now. They just see so many.
Silent crankbaits?
The silence, the Z-bosses, they don't seem to have as hard of a thump. And but I'll throw a 10XD some, especially right now when they're first starting to get out. I'll throw the Z-Boss 25. Usually, I actually crank with 8-pound mono, which is really odd, and people throw a fit over that. But there's a reason for that, and if somebody would like to know, we'll get into that in a little more detail. But I can get that Z-Boss 25, 23, 24, 25, somewhere in there. Good long cast.
So my buddy Hunter Mills can get a Z-Boss 25 on 8-pound fluoro down to 30 foot.
Yep.
I mean, they'll get down there. Now, that's long lining it, too.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't do a ton of long lining. I will if I have to, but I don't like to. It's
hard to keep them on.
Yeah, it's so hard to keep them on. It's so inefficient. I'm one of these guys, if I've got 100 schools found, I'm not going to spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on a particular school. And I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here, but your best opportunity, if you've got a school bass, your best opportunity at catching the biggest one that lives in there is in your first 2 or 3 casts. I mean, once 1 or 2 of them get caught, it's pretty well done. I'm not saying you can't catch a big one. I can't tell you how many times I've caught the biggest one that I caught out of that school on the last cast or whatever. But day in, day out, you're going to catch your biggest one on the first 2 or 3 casts. And so I try to do that. I maximize the opportunity to do that as many times as possible. So I won't spend very long on the school at all.
So this one guy, Det Bass, Fritz cranks with braid now. You ever tried it? I've personally never done it.
I've never done the braid deal. See, I'm the total opposite. And since he asked it, I'll quickly get into the way that I get these fish to bite a crankbait now is a total reaction bite. Rip it through there as fast as possible. I mean, a 5-4 to 1 tattoo at 150, burning it. And what I found is with mono, it's got so much more stretch. And I actually throw the P-Line CXX, I believe is the model.
The green P-Line?
The moss green P-Line. It's got the most stretch out of any mono I've ever seen. When one eats it, the rod, it actually takes, there's a period of time when the bass eats it to when I actually feel him bite it, because there's so much stretch. Generally it's on a long cast, that I just feel like I get them better. I get it a little deeper in their mouth. Also, when they get up there by the boat and they take that hard surge, you've got all that extra stretch there. I actually use a little stiffer, and it's still a crankbait rod, but it's on the stiffer end. I don't like the glass rods, real whippy. I can't feel anything. So I kind of compensate using a little stiffer rod with that super stretchy mono that P-Line makes.
So this Mitchell asks, snaps on your deep cranks or not?
I don't. I've experimented with it. I
don't think it makes much difference.
Yeah, I'm not a big.
And if you break them off as quick as I do, you're just wasting money. Now, I will say what differs from me to you, I like my rod that's got a lot of tip.
Yep, and a lot of people do.
But I like backbone, because when you throw a 10XD, 6XD, 8XD, C20, C25, those crankbaits pull hard, and you just can't go out there with an 8-foot long noodle stick. You've got to have some backbone.
You're exactly right. And that's the cool thing about fishing. Everybody has their own opinion, and what you like is not necessarily what I like. But that doesn't mean it's wrong most of the time. I don't mind a limber rod, but what I don't like is generally when you get a lot of tip, you lose that feel. And I want to feel when it goes from little pea gravel to shell to 3 ridge mussels. I want to know. I don't like the feeling when you're reeling along and all of a sudden the rod just kind of loads up and just gets heavy, and I don't know. That's just back when in the cranking days, 2008 to 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there when they quit biting it. That was a system that I kind of came up with, and that's what I've got confidence in. And
well, I tell guys all the time, when you got the right cranking setup, when you can feel the bait move left and right, and because when you get in tune, you can feel that bait moving left and right. And it's almost like you feel it hitting the bottom every time, and you'll know when that bait goes out of sync that something's grabbed it.
In fact, on Thursday, we got on school. I got them fired up on a crankbait. I actually had to throw a drop shot in there a few times to catch several, and then threw the crankbait in and could catch them every cast. But it was funny. On several occasions, I told my client that day, Mr. Larry Walker, a great friend of mine, I told him, I said, man, one's behind it. He's pushing it. Whoop, there he is. I mean, you could literally feel the crankbait when one gets, and what I call hunting it, sharking it, they'll get right in behind the crankbait. And it's like I don't know if it's like drafting or...
Right, it's like a NASCAR when a guy gets behind it and his back end gets loose.
Exactly. It loses its traction. Like you almost have to feel like you got to catch back up to it, and then all of a sudden he'll eat it. And it was really neat. He was amazed at how, I could tell that. Of course, I've done it for a long time. But, but again, I've got the right setup to be able to feel that. I know what's going to happen before it happens.
So, guys, how do you keep from cramping up while deep cranking constantly? I drink a lot of water, and which you need to do offshore fishing anyways. I drink too many Mountain Dews. That's really not good for you. But drink water, and, you've got to get out there and do it.
So back when the cranking was really, really good, and this sounds ridiculous, but back when it was really, really good, you didn't throw a crankbait into the school and not catch them most of the time. So, you honestly spent almost as much time reeling one in as you did getting the crankbait to the bottom. Most of the time, that's all it took once you found one of these schools. I would actually throw a 6.4 or 6.6 to 1 back then because I was not actually cranking it most of the time. I was reeling one in. Now
you've got to do some work.
You've got to do some work. I can't actually crank with that higher gear ratio. I fish too much, and I'm starting to get some wrist and elbow issues. And
open that we got to get a little draft in here. We're getting a little hot.
It is.
We've hot boxed this thing. So a couple guys want to know, what is your cranking setup?
So what I've got is the new Jinko 710. It's the Gambler Series 710 medium heavy moderate action cranking rod. On the reel, I'm throwing a Daiwa Tatula 150 in the 5.4 to 1 gear ratio. I believe it's the model is TAT 150P, as in Paul.
Yes, the 150P. So they make a 100P, which is, I've got out there, but I backlashed the crap out of it today. And then the 150P, you got a deeper, wider spool. So that's what makes it really good for big plugs, is you can put a ton of line on this thing. The
biggest, whatever rod it may be, the biggest component to me, or most important component to a cranking setup, is a large spool capacity on your reel. Whether it's a Daiwa or Shimano, whatever it may be, you need to have at least, 170 yards, whatever, 150, whatever that 150
I throw on them, I've been using the smaller 100s. And because I use that, 10-pound fluoro, I can get a lot of line on
Exactly.
But the good thing about the deep spools, if you break off, you don't got to re-spool again. You just keep on. And another trick, I'll tell you this, if you got 6.3 to 1, 6.4 to 1, and you just cannot find a 5.5 or 5.4, under spool your reel. Take about 40 yards off that thing, and you will basically decrease the inches per turn.
Correct.
So you have the same ratio, but you're not bringing in the same amount of line.
Exactly. I don't encourage that due to the casting distance, but that is a really neat trick. I actually had somebody show me that a couple years ago, and it worked.
What guys used to do is get those Chronarch 50 MGs. They would spool up those things with like 8 and 10 pound fluorocarbon and crank with those, because it's already a small spool, and you could basically get a cranking setup out of that. I may have to go whip my kids here in a minute. Is Brooks outside?
They opened the door, but I don't know.
All right.
It sounds like a fiasco in there.
What is the deepest running crankbait that you know of?
I've always heard that Man's 30 will dive deep, but I've never thrown it. I don't know. It's 10XD.
Yeah. I in all my experiences, I will say the Z-Boss 25 and actually that Cloud 25 would get down. What are you doing? Aren't you supposed to be in there? Brooks?
She's upset, isn't
Hey,
she?
I gotta go run real quick. I gotta go see what my son has come out here.
Hey, how do I pull that Navionics? You mind if I start on that?
What?
Alright, so we're going to take over here for just a moment. If I can figure out how to do this. Let's see. What I have intended here, and of course we've run way over already, just kind of getting into the basics, but here, let me jump out.
She wanted his candy.
Hey, I want candy too.
Sorry about that, guys. We had to put a little discipline up in my kids there. My little girl wanted my son's candy, and he got mad. And now she has a fit going. But
what I was saying there is my goal with tonight is to, if I can, simplify offshore ledge fishing. And really kind of narrow it down. A lot of guys are so intimidated with just getting started.
Right.
When I got started, I felt the same way. But you can really, with a few key, pieces of information, you can really narrow the lake down to where it actually fishes fairly small. May not seem like it at first, but when you really start studying the maps, things shrink down tremendously, and I really want to kind of simplify that for you. Once we go over that, I'm sure we'll have a ton of questions. We'll get into some screenshots. Again, I kind of hinted on it earlier. I'll be honest, these are not the best screenshots in the world. These fish, there was a huge BFL on Pickwick today, and everyone was out there practicing, and it was literally every school was getting idled over every 10 or 15 minutes. In one sense, that's good, because I want you to see what these really crazy looking schools that have been idled over and super pressured and probably not going to bite real well. And then I also had a few little sneak holes that weren't, and you could tell. I mean, it's very, very obvious there.
Right, so do you want me to pull up Navionics
Yeah,
first?
let's go into that.
So we're going to pull up Navionics real quick here. Let's see here. Oh, wrong thing. We'll go ahead. Chart Veer.
Man, she is pissed.
I know.
She's not giving it up.
All right, so we're here on the north end of Kentucky Lake, and obviously you can see
Big Bear.
Yes, so this is Big Bear Creek right here, and I'm going to pull up the chat.
Perfect. We can do it at Big Bear if you want. Well, let's go down to Jonathan.
We're going to go down to Jonathan Creek. So this is
easier.
a little bit. It's going to be very easy to dissect this.
Yes.
So our current on Kentucky Lake actually runs south to north, believe it or not. The water doesn't fall downhill, it goes uphill.
Correct.
So when you look at this map here of Jonathan Creek, you've never been on Kentucky Lake before.
And it's real quick, it's important to know the top of this screen is north. The bottom of the screen is south. So the current is running from bottom to top of the screen.
Trying to get this zoomed in. All right, that's pretty good right there.
So what I want to start with, and this is really how I break down. Can they see us, or is it just a map?
It's just a map.
Okay. So
I can put you in there.
No,
Okay.
that's fine. So it's important to understand, and hey, everyone is a little different. This is just how I do things. Regardless of what time of year it is, and regardless of what lake it is, the way that I start is I find out where they spawn. Because that is the most predictable piece of, what these fish are going to do. It's just my way of saying, okay, I know for a fact this is a spawning area. And from there, I can start tracking, regardless of what time of year, you know, whether it's August or December. If I know where they spawn and you understand kind of what these fish do, you can figure out where they went from there.
So Jonathan Creek's a major creek on the north end of Kentucky Lake. And when you look in here, obviously, first thing I see, you've got this big pocket, lots of shallow water.
Exactly.
That's going to be a main spawning pocket. You've got pockets down here. Obviously, a good creek to spawn in. It's very close to the main lake, and I'll zoom in here so you can really see. And then you've even got a back section, which most of this is really silt and mud and stuff.
Silty. I'm not saying they don't live back there, but it's...
They do spawn back here really good, but they got to go somewhere.
Right.
So these fish are basically going to come out of here, whoop, and they're going to follow this creek channel, and I don't think y'all can see my mouse cursor. And then you got a huge spawning pocket right here. You got a marina. Marinas are great for spawning fish.
Yep, sure are.
And you've got a couple of high humps out here and stuff like that. This is stuff right in here. That's the kind of stuff is the first places I look for.
Exactly. Hey, if y'all will comment to see if you can see our mouse. That's kind of important. I need to know that. This is new to me anyway. You may have done this before, but I have never done this, so I need to make sure.
No mouse.
No mouse. Dadgummit. All right.
I'll figure out how to work around that.
Yep, we'll do the best we can.
No problem, Chad. Thank you so much for joining. But if y'all can see where it says Jonathan Creek, and to the left there, it'd be like a little hump, 14, 15, 16. That's a little high spot.
Yep.
But see, what I like is there's a little red fish right here where it says Wolf Branch. I'll zoom in on this even more. Is this little underwater point turn thing. And I've fished this before, so I'm not going to lie.
Hey, I wonder if they can see that little crosshair.
Can y'all, if y'all can see this crosshair? Yeah, there you go.
That might work. That way we can get everybody on the same page.
Right.
Here.
So right here where this crosshair here is, you've got an underwater point, and basically comes out and makes a turn. This is a good stopping spot out of this little pocket.
Yep. So let's go up there to the first pocket on the north bank up there.
All right, we're going to go way up
So, all right, right there, perfect. So you'll see this little pocket here. If I'm looking on a map, say I've never been to Kentucky Lake, never seen Jonathan Creek before, that is a very obvious, especially if you have ever been in that pocket, you know it's full of gravel and rock. Great place. It's protected from the north wind, which is very important early in the spawning phase. This time of year when it's warm and we don't have very many cold fronts, it's not as important. But the early stages of the spawn, I typically will lean more towards the northern bank on a lake. But
I'm not going to lie, I've smoked them right here.
Oh, me too. I've crushed them. So I'll start at that spawning pocket. From there, what I'm looking for, and this is whether you're on the Tennessee River or St. Clair, well, let's try Erie. St. Clair's pretty flat. But anywhere in the country that I have ever been, I just got back from Sam Rayburn, same exact way. To simplify offshore fishing, what I'm looking for is anything different. Now, that is very broad, and I understand that. But the way I relate is if you've got a line of buck bushes, and you've got one bush that's sticking out 3 feet further than the rest, it's different. And that's generally where you're going to catch them. It's the same exact way offshore, except you just can't see the bush that's sticking out a little further. You've got to look on your mapping here. So what I mean by different, there's 4 or 5 key ingredients that I'm looking for. One is the upstream side of a bar. So, for instance, let's look right there. Click on that.
Right here.
Yep. So that's kind of a goofy-looking bar, but the upstream side of a bar is a great place. One thing that's a big misconception with offshore fishing on a river system anyway is that bass want to be in the eddy, and that's where they school up, and that's where they want to live. You actually couldn't be any further from the truth than that. Generally, they're going to be right on in an area where the majority of the current is. So again, you have to imagine the current is running from the bottom of the screen to the top. So that particular point right there, and I've actually caught a few, that particular point is facing into the current. So you've got your upstream side of the bar. You've got the downstream can be productive at times. The upstream side of a bar, anywhere that a creek channel comes out, if we'll zoom out here just a little bit, go out there to the big community place just south of the underwater island, if you can. But you've got the upstream side of the bar, the mouth of any creek channel. You've got any turn, anytime a ledge makes a turn or it might make a little a point, might make a little depression or where the current's eating out a piece of the ledge, or a high spot and a ditch.
Right,
that's what you catch them on.
Now I got this thing zoomed in, so now you really see the creek channel come out, right here, and it dumps, and this is the main lake.
Yep. So take the south route here and go out. See where it dumps in right here.
So this is where it comes in. This whole creek channel, obviously you can follow the buoys,
yep,
and it dumps in. I've caught them really good right here on these.
Yep. If I'm not mistaken, that's where the whole, not that I want to get into it, but that's where the Lambert and Haynes ordeal went on right there. Well, on one of the biggest community holes on the entire lake. I mean,
it ain't no secret.
No.
Somebody took it to the house, though.
Exactly. But again, to reiterate that, and I kind of stretched it out a little more than I wanted to simplify offshore fishing, you're looking at the upstream side of a bar or a ledge. You're looking at turns or points, high spots, and ditches / depression. Each one of those places is going to be a little different. But it's important to know that, again, when you look at an area, you want to kind of imagine where the current is going to hit it the hardest.
Right.
Again, hence
so on a spot like this right here. And if you can see on this, places where these contour lines get really, really tight together, that's going to make your sharpest break.
Exactly. So the tighter these lines are together, the closer they are together, the steeper the break, the more spread out. You'll see on the back side of this bar, they're much more spread out. That's a gradual, very long, tapering ledge there, which they'll also use as well.
So you're going to have to explain something. I get this all the time. What is a bar?
So a bar is, this is going to turn into a nightmare. And half the people are going to praise me and half of them are going to make fun of me. But I imagine a bar as a peninsula. I always use Florida as an example because everybody knows the shape of Florida. So obviously an island, an underwater island, it has water on all four sides. Well, if you can imagine, Florida, for instance, it's a peninsula that sticks out. Right. If you can imagine that under the water on Kentucky Lake or any other lake, that is a bar. It's generally speaking a very narrow, high spot that's very long. It is the best. Now that takes many shapes and many forms. There's not a right or wrong there, but a bar, again, I imagine it, if it was above water, would be a peninsula.
Right. So, a couple little questions here. Which way are you going to cast first? When you pull up to, whether it's this spot, we're looking at here on the map, or maybe you want to go up here and I might be getting too close to some juice I don't need to show.
There is no secret juice anymore.
Yeah, there's no...
8 years ago, you could not have paid me enough money to sit down and talk about all this. Yeah. But now, I mean, it's...
You see, here's a great example of a secondary creek channel from the main lake dumping in, and it goes all the way down here to Jonathan Creek, and that's actually a very popular area.
It is. So before we get any further, we've kind of skipped, and I knew we would because we're getting questions like rapid fire. So zoom back out and go to that spawning pocket we started at. I want to explain this before we get any further, if we can.
Well, I can't. It's just computers.
Yep. No, it's...
So we're going back to Jonathan.
Okay. So there's our spawning pocket there at the top right of the screen. So I have identified a great spawning area, but yet I know they're not on the bank. They're not spawning. This is almost June. They're fixing to get there. Haven't quite yet, unfortunately, on Kentucky Lake, but it's coming. Hypothetically speaking, they're already out on the river, they're offshore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start at my spawning pocket, and I am going to work my way out on those 4 or 5 items, the downstream side, or excuse me, the upstream side of the bar, the mouth of the creek channel, any turn, any point. So, for instance, the very first place that they stop, click right there. That is and I know for a fact, I've obliterated them right there several times. Yeah. That is, when they get done spawning, that is the very first place they stop. And they'll kind of use that particular bar as a place to kind of heal up and rest and kind of recuperate, so to speak. But from there, and what I want to get at is you can track these fish all the way to, in this case on the Tennessee River, the actual river ledge, by using the same 4 or 5 items that we've discussed. So from there, what they're going to do is they're going to get into the creek channel. It's important to know that creek channels is just like a highway. I mean, I use 641 to get up here to your house, to your place. A bass, or really any game fish for that matter, is going to use a creek channel in the very same way.
Just like Alton Jones told me, bass are just like deer. They don't travel out in the open fields.
Exactly.
Deer always use wood lines, fence rows.
Yep.
Same thing with bass.
Yep.
Unless they're schooling, eating. The thing with deer, they get out in the middle of the fields when they're hungry and they're horny.
Yep.
And that's what bass do as well. So
gets them every time.
Right.
But it's important to know that you can, as long as you use this system, at least this system works for me and a lot of my clients, you start at the spawning pocket and you work your way out. And actually, for learning purposes, I encourage you to start at the spawning pocket and work your way out. Actually, once you get comfortable with it, you should really start at the river and work your way back into the pocket. This goes for any time of the year. I want to, when I'm trying to figure out where bass live, or what pattern they're on, what stage they're in, I'm always going to start ahead of them and work my way back. I find that I end up running into them much faster if I start ahead of them, as opposed to starting, say, in the spawning pocket and fishing every little point and pocket or turn, creek channel turn. It takes me longer to find them, and oftentimes the big females are the first ones to move, so you end up running into the females first.
Now I've got us on a little split screen, if that's all right with you.
Yep.
So
perfect.
What I do, and I fished this spot before, I fished several spots, so they're kind of community-ish. But when Jake talks about foam, you've got these little, if you can see these little turns and stuff, these secondary stuff, I might fish this, but this school may move over here. It may move over here.
Don't forget, they can't see the mouse. You got to click on it.
Okay. It may move right, they may move right here on this little turn. They may move right over here to this hump. I like fishing these little humps.
Yep.
And I've caught some really big fish on this one right here. And they're going to use this little creek channel as a migration route. So just because you don't catch a fish here, you don't catch one here or here, doesn't mean there's not a school sitting right there.
Yep. You just keep following it out. Again, you use those 4 or 5 situations to bounce your way, hop, skip, and jump your way. And I'll be honest with you, most of the time it takes very, very little time. Because, with today's electronics, you don't have to make a cast until you see them.
Right.
Not only do you not make a cast until you see them, you don't make a cast until you see bass that are actively feeding, and you can catch them.
So one of my favorite spots right here, and I don't mind giving this away, or used to be, is this little spot right here. And I found this before there was side scan and all this out of my little 18-foot nitro. And if you've ever in doubt and you're on the Tennessee River, especially Kentucky Lake, look for red buoy. If you see a red buoy, that means there is shallow water nearby.
Yep.
So if you see a red buoy, investigate that.
Yeah. And also, what Baxter is not bringing up is that is the downstream side of the creek channel. Now, this gets confusing. Again, remember, I said it's the upstream side of the bar. As far as a creek channel goes, it's the downstream side. If you look at it, go out to the big community hole there at the mouth of Johnson if you can. On the north end where everybody catches them. The big giant school gets. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep. We're going up here. Right up here.
Keep going. Yeah, it's right there.
Yep.
Right where the 20 is.
Yep.
So
this is a big community spot.
Yep. Again, zoom out just a hair, not a ton, but
man, Avionics better send me some money for this.
That's right. So you'll notice, I forget they can't see the cursor. You'll notice that the click right there. That is actually the true mouth of this creek channel. There's this little secondary tier there that I have caught them on before, but right there is where they live. If anybody wants to mark that waypoint, along with 482 other people on a Saturday. But again, the most important thing is we're not doing this to show you places. We're doing this to explain their routes and what what they're doing. The downstream side of a creek channel is where the current is going to hit the hardest. And again, it's not what the old timers and what the Tommy Snows and the Bob Snows still fight me over.
Bob Snow.
It's not the eddy that they're actually living in. They're living where the current hits the hardest. Now they may get behind something. They may utilize the shape of the ledge or the contour, to tuck out of the current a little bit. But it's actually where the current hits the hardest. So again, you can imagine the current is running from the bottom of the screen to the top. Right there on that little high spot where the mouth of that creek channel comes out is where the current hits it the hardest.
I've caught them over on this too.
Easy. You're jumping ahead of yourself. Come on, man.
It's all right. There ain't no fish in our lake anymore anyway.
I knew that was coming. I have. Actually, one of the best days I ever had on the north end of the lake. I caught them really close, like way up on that bar somewhere. Right. It was unreal.
All right, so I got to get into this, and I wish I had a little boat. I need to get a little boat image up here. So, if you're fishing this, Jake, which way are you making a cast?
So, anytime, again, this can change.
Are you the guy that puts the boat in the deeper water and throws on top?
Absolutely not. That is the last place that I will put my boat. There is one occasion that I will do that, and we'll get into that later. But what happens with these schools when they're actively feeding, when you're actually going to catch them, every time you reel one to the boat, there's several that are following it. Now because we have fairly clear water, they don't get real close to the boat. They'll spook. But if you just flipped a drop shot or a spoon right out in front of the boat where you just reeled that one, you'd catch one almost every time. So my idea is I do not want to drag these fish out into deep water because then they're going to suspend. They become very difficult to bite. They get inactive very quickly. The other side to that is, at least here on the Tennessee River or any river system, 90% of the time, almost always, the bass are going to face upstream. So on Kentucky Lake, they're going to face south. So I'm actually going to set my boat up north of the school, downstream of the school bass. And I'm going to throw past them and reel the bait downstream as a bait fish would naturally.
Almost like you fish a river.
Exactly. It's the same setup. There's two reasons I do that. One, because I don't want to throw at the fish's tail. That's never a good idea. You learn that very quickly in bed fishing. But the number one thing is once you start catching them, you don't want to drag the school out into no man's land. Oftentimes, I will, like for instance, when these fish, they get really deep on this hole right here, I actually start catching them better when I drag them up to the boat. I'll take my Ultrex off a spot lock and I'll let myself drift backwards a little ways, and then I'll start fishing where the boat just was. And a lot of times you'll catch them better,
right?
Because you've gotten them up shallower, you've gotten them up on top of it. And again, most of the time, the hardest bass to catch is the first one in the school. Once you get them going, most of the time it's just a matter of getting your bait back in there.
Back in the day, one of the best baits to get them going. And Jake got really famous for that. Him and Randall Morris at Bethel College on Pickwick Lake, Ben Parker Magnum Spoon. That thing used to fire up a school.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. They'll still bite it.
Right. So Cooper Conley asked, what's your favorite bait to use for bass?
Jeez.
You did win a lot of money on the jerky jig.
My favorite bait is whatever they're biting. But I would have to say it's a stereotypical. I'm a Brent Anderson follower. I love that fall topwater bite. That's my very I wouldn't say most enjoyable, but I really, really like to watch them blow up on that top water. When you find a school, and what's cool on Kentucky Lake, and I haven't found it really on Pickwick yet. I think David Allen understands it, but I have not broken that code on Pickwick. But on Kentucky Lake, these same big schools get up on shallow bars, and it can be lights out, unreal. Cold Floyd's another good one.
When we say shallow, you look at a lot of this stuff here, like this spot, it's 16 foot on top. There's 15, all that stuff. But then you get down here.
Go to the head of the island there.
We're going to go to the head of Jonathan Creek Island here.
Like the actual island.
Yeah.
They get right there in the fall.
Right.
Whoops.
See where this is like really dirt shallow?
Remember, you got to press it.
1-2 foot. This is Uh-oh. This right here is the kind of stuff you'll fish in the fall.
Yep. And I'll be throwing a Sexy Dog or a SB 125. What's the 6 cents, the big one? What's the
Mag Dog?
The Mag Dog, yep.
Yeah, we're going to be throwing that one.
Yep. That's a mean dude right there.
But
that's probably my favorite way to catch them. But I'll be honest with you, I probably make more money every year throwing the trimmerhead, Tennessee River trimmerhead with a 7-inch, sometimes a 5-inch jerky J on it. Day in, day out, offshore fishing, that's the bait that I'm going to throw.
Right.
Although it's funny, every school will fire up differently. And when we start looking at some of these screenshots, I'll explain. 7, 8, and 9 years ago, when there were a handful of us that knew how to do the scanning and could turn around and catch them, you could throw whatever you wanted to. I mean, it was just whatever you like catching them on. Now, you need to go. Now, it's not all about finding them. Now, once you find them, that's just a piece of the puzzle. Now you've got to figure out what they're going to bite. And I'll get into that on some of these screenshots to make a lot more sense.
Right. So we're gonna get into some screenshots. This here is something Jake hasn't talked about road beds, but if you don't know anything about structure fishing offshore, a really good place to spot is get your map and find road beds. And so this is a community hole, but you can see you've got a big flat coming out here.
Is that Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this road bed comes out, then it runs up onto this flat. And I will fish this thing down, but I've had my best luck where it transitions into stuff like that. A lot of guys fish this tight little buoy area, and it's great.
Yep.
But I've caught my biggest sacks where this road bed intersects these shallow parts on this flat. And they're easy to find on a map, and they're easy to find on a depth finder. Once you get in the bay, you don't have to worry about the current stuff like Jake was talking about. I just sit in deep and throw the shallow, but I've caught a lot of fish fishing parallel.
Yeah,
because a lot of times you'll scan it, and those fish, they're on top of that road bed.
Yep.
And what I've kind of learned through the years is why make one cast straight across, because you're missing half the school. If you will parallel, you're bringing that crankbait or swim bait or whatever through way more fish.
Yep. You're exactly. And I will still, if at all possible, still not sit deep and throw shallow. Even when I'm hunting with them, say I'm cranking down a shallow bar, it's too shallow to scan, I still won't do it if I can help it. I mean, occasionally it's just the way it has to be, but I'm just so paranoid. It's so hard to get a school fired up these days that when I get one fired up, I want everything to go right. I don't want to make a mistake and drag them out into deep water and mess the whole rig up. I mean, it's to learn and to really go through this in a lot of detail, it would be here all night. Right. I mean, I could sit here and talk about this for 3 or 4 days.
We should. I think what we need to do, Jake, is we just got to go out and we've got to film a series of ledge fishing.
We do.
Start with dissecting the map, dissecting your depth finder, dissecting screenshots, and if that's something you guys would like to see with me and Jake, we'll absolutely do it.
Please do. We've discussed that on numerous occasions, but we really need some hype.
We're going to get some stuff up on I'm going to get the Malone's Marine channel going as well. So
we need to show some interest, so we'll have a little more motivation to do it.
Right. All right, so we're going to go to some screenshots real quick. All right, so this right here, this is off your Humminbird unit.
You would start with a bluegill.
And this is I gotta show guys what things look like. But this is a bluegill bed.
It is. It is. So that was these pictures were actually taken Thursday on Pickwick's. Kind of short notice. We came up with this in pretty short fashion. But what you'll see there, and I've got a horrible glare. Can we turn this just a little more? All right, perfect. So what you actually see there, you'll see these little divots, and they're all in clusters. Right. And inside of the clusters, you will actually see little bitty light specks. And that is actually the bluegill that are currently in that bed. Actually watching an older gentleman catch a few of them after I got done scanning this one. But it's important to know, we'll kind of start here. It's not where I was planning to start, but we'll modify it. We'll make it work. The very bright, don't pay attention at all to the bluegill beds there for right now. Look at the left side of the screen, and you'll see really, really bright returns. So the brighter, now this is side imaging, is what we're talking about right now. The brighter the return, the harder the object is, whether it be a stump, a rock. In this case, that's actually the edge of the boat ramp there. It's kind of broken up rubble and rock there. Now at the bottom of that screen, you'll actually start to see where it fades into a darker kind of, it almost looks like, you know, a shadow down there. What that is the end of that boat ramp will fade off, and right about, you'll actually see two tires there about halfway down the screen on the left. Right about there is where the silt starts. So the softer the bottom, the darker the screen is, the softer the bottom. Right. I always relate this to taking one of your kids' bouncy balls and bouncing it on a chunk of pavement out here. It's going to bounce. I mean, it'll really come back to you. You take 2 or 3 steps over there in the grass and bounce the very same ball, and it's not going to bounce very, very high at all.
So Robert Willow wants to know, can you ledge fish in deeper lakes like Hartwell, Herring Lakes? Can it be a deal on Herring Lake?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They are, just coming from experience, they are much more related to cover on blueback herring lakes in general.
And what I kind of want to say, and that's why I title this video Offshore Fishing.
Yes.
We may be talking ledges, but really what we're talking about is fishing offshore, away from the bank, in no man's land.
Yes.
And whether that's, they do that at Lanier.
Yes.
And they fish some deep brush piles, some really deep humps. But they're using all the same theory is what we do here on the Tennessee River.
Exactly. And it's also important, and I actually, we spent, and we don't have to this time, we spent quite a bit of time last year on this. Cover and structure are two totally different things, and it kills me that some of the biggest name pros get this wrong. Structure is the bottom contour change. Any change, if it's 9 feet deep and it goes to 8, or if it's 90 feet deep and it goes to 8, that is a bottom, or that is structure. Anytime the bottom changes form, cover is a stump, a rock, brush pile, an object that a fish gets around. The structure is what the fish relate to.
Correct.
So it's two totally different things there.
So now we've got another screenshot. Obviously, we've got a hard bottom. We've got a bright return here on the edge. The side scan. So the little boat down the center line, that's the center of the boat. You've got 4 fish, 5, 6 fish here on the right. Obviously, this is the edge of the ledge where it makes this dark spot on the right side of the screen.
Yep.
And then here's your fish down here on the small down scan. What I find interesting is Jake has his set up very small, not very wide on the down imaging or the sonar, and he's got a large amount of side scan area. A lot of the guys I fish with are opposite.
Yep.
They're small on side scan.
So here's my take on this. And I'll be honest with you, the client that I took out Thursday when we did this has not done the latest software update, the Humminbird software update. I actually like to have my side imaging on the top half of the screen, all the way stretched across left and right of the screen, and my down imaging on the bottom half of the screen. I want as much side imaging as I can possibly get. Because I'm actually, contrary to what most people do, I'm actually looking for these bass on the side imaging. If I happen to ride directly over them and see them on the down imaging, great. That helps me do a few things. But I am purely looking for them on side imaging, which is very much different than what most people do. This is a really neat screenshot here. What you see from starting at the bottom right of the screen, anytime that you have a very vertical break or ledge, drop off, whatever you want to refer to it as, it will cause or create this shadow. So you actually, what these fish were on is a creek channel turn. Again, all part of our little system that we've discussed very briefly. And you can actually see where the creek channel makes a bend right here. It starts at the bottom left, shoots in towards the center of the screen, and then abruptly turns out to the right. And what these bass are relating to, if you'll look at each one of these little black dots that are evenly spaced right along that black shadow area there, those are all bass. One thing that's important on side imaging, once you get your unit set correctly, and I'll be honest with you, that is a huge step. You can know exactly what bass look like, and if you don't have your unit set correctly to show them, you're not going anywhere.
We're going to knock that out next.
Yes. What you'll see here, these bass are, this particular school is a community school. It has been idled over a ton this day. I mean, it took me like numerous occasions just to get on this school. And what you'll see over on the down imaging is how spread out and how high these bass are actually suspended. That is a very inactive school that is not set up in an aggressive feeding mode or attack mode. I think
right.
Who was that? Anyway, somebody uses that on FLW Tour. But that is a great indication that this is a school bass. This is not a school bass that I expect to pull up and catch 30 on. But moving back to the side imaging, you'll see them. They're relating right on top of the ledge there, right on top of the break, which is very, very common. 90% of the bass that you're going to find are going to be right on top or really, really close. They might be way up on the flat. Most of them are going to be relating to the ledge, but they're going to be on top of the ledge. And on the side imaging, you'll notice each bass is going to have space in between them. There's 3 ways to distinguish different species on side imaging and down imaging as well. That is, number 1 is size, the shape, and most importantly, how they relate to each other. So if there's several of them there...
So here's a good screenshot right here. Obviously, I could tell you if I saw that on any graph, I would say that is 100% bass.
Yep. And that is an active, an active school that I think we caught about 20 or 30 out of that school. We caught quite a few on that particular school. But again, you notice each one of them has space in between them. Now this school is they're not a school of big ones.
But Sam Lashley tells me he can look at that and tell you if that's a 4-pounder, a 5-pounder, or a 10-pounder. When you look at that, do you know the exact size of those bass?
I'm not going to tell you that it weighs 4.5 pounds. I can tell you the difference between small ones and big ones. Again, I'm not going to tell you he weighs 5.3 pounds. But the way that I can tell that is you'll notice how close that those bass are related to each other. Mm-hmm. And you'll actually notice there's quite a bit of red. Now, what I'm relating to is the down imaging here. Mm-hmm. These fish, for whatever reason, did not show up real well on the side imaging. There's a few scattered around, but what we're primarily looking at on this screenshot is the down imaging there on the left. The more red that you have inside of that fish, the larger that fish is. And it could be an object.
It's creating a bigger return.
It's creating a harder return. Also, another way to, a very quick way to look to see the size or how I differentiate is most of the time a big dominant female or a school of dominant females will not stack very close to each other. They're not related very closely.
They'll kind of be like one dot, some space, another dot.
They'll be, what I kind of, say to myself or kind of look for is they'll be about, 2 to 4 feet away from each other. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately on this day, there was too many boats. I did not want to go to some of the better schools that had some big ones in it. just too many boats around. So I've only got one screenshot or one snapshot of a school of big ones that I can kind of get into that a little more detail. But that is exactly what you're looking for on the down imaging. Those bass are absolutely ready to bite, and you can catch the...
And I'm going to tell you, because somebody's going to watch this and say, well, how do I know the difference between that and carp? One, carp are going to be longer.
Yep.
And there's going to be 10 times that many right there, and they stack vertically.
Exactly.
So carp, you would see about 4 to 5 layers right there. Even if there's only 10 or 12 carp, they'll kind of layer up.
Exactly.
And they'll create some big return shadows on your side scan.
Exactly. One other thing real quick before we move off of this that I want to discuss is the only real use that I have in down imaging is... and this is a great example. You see these bass are 6 inches to 2 feet off of the bottom. So, again, going back to not only is it important to be able to find these fish, but once you find them, you have to understand how to catch them. Mm-hmm. And a big part of that is deciding what bait to throw in first or even on down the line. So I know these fish right here, based on the way they look, you could catch a few on a crankbait, a few on a football jig, a worm, dragging it around. But these fish are a little ways off the bottom. That's a swim bait, scrounger, right spoon. If it was a jig, you're stroking it, hopping it. These bass are, if you look at the anatomy of a bass, they're designed to feed up. They do not feed down. I'm not saying one won't follow a bait and eat it, below where they were related to, but generally speaking, they're going to feed up, and same way with crappie as well. And so I never want to fish a bait below the bass. If anything, I would rather be 10 feet above them as I would a foot below them.
So that ties into something guys ask me a lot about, is like the Scottsboro line through swim bait. Here, I'm going to pull that up real quick. Grab me one from behind that Oop, wrong button.
There was one out just a second ago. What did I do? Here we go.
So, like the Scottsboro line through, this is a bait. Guys go, well, why would you throw this bait? It's got a treble hook on the bottom. It's going to get snagged. I'm not going to fish this swim bait on the bottom. Mm-mm. This is perfect for those fish that are suspended 2 foot off the bottom, because they're looking above, and so they're going to come up and eat this bait just like this right here.
Yep.
Now, when those fish really hug the bottom, where you can catch them on a crankbait or dragging a football jig, that's when I want that swim bait that's got a top hook.
Yes.
So I just wanted to explain that a little bit.
It's very important to not get too carried away when you find a school, to not pay attention to how they're related, because it can be the difference in not getting a bite and catching 20 or 30 of them, just like we did out of this school.
So now we got another school of fish. You got more fish suspended way up off the bottom.
Exactly. And you'll actually see there are a few. This is a better.
That's a good one.
There's a few good ones mixed in this one. We caught a few decent ones, 3-pounders out of this school. The reason I got excited about this screenshot right here is that, again, you have to understand these fish were very, very edgy, and they were getting pounded. I mean, it was every 10 or 15 minutes a boat would idle over them. What's cool about this image is, now again, all of these bass, what you're looking for, if you've got your unit set up correctly and your transducer placed in the right spot, they're going to show up as golf balls. Whether it be crappie, any game fish are going to show up as golf balls. If you look at, on the down imaging again, if you look at the top half of that school, you notice how they're very elongated. They almost kind of look like a tic-tac. What's happening is those fish are swimming out away from the boat as we idled over them. And when the transducer shoots its signal out, it's catching a sliver of the fish. It's actually catching them while they're swimming away. And that happens so much. Just got off the lake with a client that exclusively uses down imaging, and it blew his mind how many bass that he's not seeing because they're swimming away from his boat before he actually runs over them. And again, just another reason why I use side imaging. But again, this is a school I would not throw a crankbait. I would not throw a football jig. I'm not saying you can't catch one or two on it, but it's just not the most optimum thing to throw in this situation.
So we'll answer a couple questions, and we're going to have to hurry up because my kids are going crazy, and man, we're getting hot in the bait room. Greg Perry asked me, do you fish the Scottsboro line through 20 feet deep? You can the 6-inch because it weighs about a 1 ounce all together. Obviously, you're going to have to count it down, but I have no problem getting it down to 15, 16 foot. Joe Loki wants to know what a shell bed is going to look like on side scan.
So you're not actually, that's a big misconception, you're not actually going to see the shells. It really takes a big rock. Not a big rock, but a fairly, you're not going to see any shells. What you're going to see is exactly what you see on this side imaging screen here, very, very bright bottom. That is indicating that it's very hard. Because I'm not seeing a lot of bumps and a lot of shadows, I know it's not rock, so therefore, what people get a big misconception on the Tennessee River, the entire river ledge in most areas is littered with small dead shell. What people are specifically talking about when they're talking about fishing shell beds is the active or live shells. That does play a big role in locating bass, but you're not actually going to be able to see those on side imaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple Kentucky Lake guides a few years ago started this big thing of how they're showing shell beds on side scan, and the best way I can tell you is if you get a really bright return on top of something like this, chances are it is. And I'll be honest, if you're wondering about it, throw a Carolina rig and you can feel them down there, or throw a big plug and grind the bottom. And if there's shells down there, you'll catch them.
You'll know it. Yep. But real quick, we'll kind of go through these. You'll notice that the bass, again, as I told you, these fish were really spooky. You could see them swimming off on the down imaging. You'll see them sprinkled across, mainly on the left side of the side imaging there. All of those little shadows. And it's important to know on side imaging that when you're in a very hard bottom, again, a very bright return, what you're looking for is the shadow of the fish. When you're in soft bottom, which we're going to get to here in just a moment, you're actually going to see the fish themselves, not the shadow. It's a contrast thing. If I'm in a really light screen, I'm looking for the dark shadow. If I'm in a very dark screen indicating it's a soft bottom, I'm looking for a very hard return, which is the fish themselves. But you'll see these fish are very, very scattered. We might have caught a few out of this, but it wasn't anything great. But it was a great indication of bass actually swimming away from your boat as you idled over them.
I gotta eliminate some spam here, so anyway, I did get a question, would you throw a big spinnerbait in there, from my buddy Mike Duff, who actually introduced me to Larry Dahlberg.
Awesome.
So,
awesome.
And I actually would throw that big spinnerbait. It's kind of funny because when Jake was here before we were streaming, we were talking about throwing big spinnerbaits out deep, and that's an art form.
That is my arch nemesis when it comes to offshore fishing. I've caught them on it, but I have not caught them like a lot of guys on this lake.
So somebody asked about crappie, and you tell me right here, this is a great example of crappie on a brush pile.
So what this is it's actually not a brush pile. It's a stump there. It's not a great representation of a stump. It's fairly eroded away.
It's wood.
It is. It's wood. But you'll notice all of these little bitty specks that are related to each other vertically, very much like carp do. But they're stacked up and suspended above the cover. A lot of times that's what these crappie are going to do, and that is a perfect representation of what crappie look like. On the crappie side of things, I do a lot of electronic trips for crappie. I'm using the side imaging to locate the cover, but once I locate a prime piece of cover, I will mark the waypoint, turn around, and idle directly over it. A lot of times these crappie are so small you just don't see them very well on side imaging. I'm not saying if there's not 200 or 300 there you can't see them, but I almost exclusively look for crappie on the down imaging. Again, I'm looking for the cover on side imaging, but once I find a brush pile or a good looking stake mat, I will then idle over it with down imaging to see that.
That's what we got next. All right, here's a great illustration of, you see these little white specks out to the side. Those are all bass, correct?
That is actually a school of very large bass. We caught the majority of our bag that day out of this school. Again, you notice how much more spacing, and again, what we're looking at here is on the left side of the screen, about or 4 inches above the 24-foot mark there. You'll see these little white, again, it looks like golf balls, or some of them look like Tic Tacs. They're all together. They're in an active feeding mode, but they have a lot more spacing. They're not all wadded up in a big knot on top of each other. And another thing you can see here is the shadow of these fish, which is very difficult to see, but the shadow is actually touching the light area, which is indicating the bass. That is telling me that those fish, on side imaging, those fish are actually sitting on the bottom. And even though this is soft bottom here, I train wrecked them on a crankbait out here in 24 feet of water on a Z-Boss 25. It was unreal how many I caught in a row.
That's what I'm talking about. We need to go back there.
We do. But what's happened here, this is very, it's not very uncommon, but it's pretty uncommon to find them in soft bottom like this. But again, there was so much pressure on the lake. These bass were staying around the areas that they want to be in, these creek channel mouths, the turns in the creek channel, points, things like that. They were relating to those areas, but they were not sitting right on what I would call the juice, or where they're supposed to be. So these fish had actually gotten tired of getting idled over and getting caught, and they moved out into 24, 25 feet of water, out into soft bottom where they're not supposed to live. And most people actually miss this school, which was one reason why we caught a bunch of them. They hadn't been fished for since they've been right here.
Right. That's let's see what else we got here on screenshots. I think this is some more crappie here. Obviously, a good school of crappie around. It looks like a couple stumps to me.
It is correct. And you'll actually notice this is a school of better grade. It's got more red. This is on a Humminbird unit. This is color palette number 11. Side imaging, I use color palette number 3. But the more red these objects have, the harder the return. Therefore, in the sense of a fish, the bigger or the larger it is. So if you look at the right stump there, on the left side of the right stump, there are 2 really, really big crappie. The biggest ones in that whole group. But that is a better grade of crappie than the other picture that we saw.
Jason Beard wants to know, when you were throwing that crankbait, were you fishing it just above those bass, or were you basically dragging it through the mud?
I was grinding it in the mud. In fact, there were several times when I would get my crankbait back in, and there would be mud still left on the bill. And actually, one of those bass, we were catching them so fast, I didn't take any pictures, but one of those bass actually had mud in between his pectoral fins, where they'd been laying in the mud all day.
That's something I tell guys on crankbait fishing. Very rarely do I throw a crankbait. If it's 20 foot of water, I'm not going to throw something that dives 15 feet.
No.
I'm going to throw something that dives 25 plus.
Yeah,
I want it to be turning up the bottom.
In fact, I always go a depth range below where. So if the fish are in 15 feet of water, most of the time I'm not going to throw a 6XD that runs. They say it runs 18, 19. Generally, you can get them about 15 or 16. I'm actually going to throw like an 8XD or even a 10XD. You know, the CD25, the CD20. I'll throw something larger or a deeper diving bait to really help it deflect and grind. The harder that it's running or digging into the bottom, the more erratic it's going to be. Therefore, it causes a lot of reaction strikes. When that crankbait bounces off and deflects a foot to the left or a foot to the right, it'll cause a bass that's very inactive or not willing to bite to react to it.
Right. So, you know, Jake, he's got to deal with Jinko. He throws a lot of the when he says CD25, CD20s, that's their version of a deep diver, very similar to 6 Cents Crush 500s.
Yep. And those are great crankbaits as well. Yeah. The Cloud 9 series is a great series.
So we're just in general speaking, we're not. I'm not sponsored by Strike King or Jake or anything. No. But most everybody understands what a 6XD, 10XD, those depth ranges.
Yes, that's a very common crankbait, which is actually. I don't throw the Strike King models as much as I used to, just because I feel like the fish have gotten conditioned to the vibration and the sound of that crankbait. It's actually the last crankbait. I catch a lot on it every year, but it's actually the last crankbait that I'll pick up in my box.
This is a good question. What y'all's take on a silent XDs versus regular when to use? So
always throw a silent. If I'm throwing a 6XD or any of the XDs, I'll always throw a silent.
Mason asks, is that a bass in the middle of the screen on the bottom? And I saw that too, but I want to think it's actually just a piece of a stump or something?
It is. Now it is a fish, and the reason that you can tell that is if you look at the bottom, there's actually a little separation between the bottom. I don't think that's a bass. If it is, it's a 8 to 10, 11, 12 pounder. It's a really big one. I'm going to say that's a catfish or a drum. Just the way it's laying there on the bottom, it's probably a big cat. But when there's one fish or one species group, one object there that is a fish, it's very, very difficult to say with any certainty that it's this or it's that. When you've got multiple, it gets a little easier. Again, the way that they relate to each other gives it away so much more than the size and the shape of the fish. So I really need to see a group of something to tell you with any certainty what it might be.
Now we got a good screenshot here. I'm going to assume these are a small school of big fish.
It's a lot larger school. I can't get the entire school in the photo on this. They're stretched, along the ledge there. Again, you'll notice they're right. These fish actually aren't on top of the ledge. This is a long tapering bar, and they're actually kind of off the tip of it there. At the top right of the screen, you'll see the best little group of them is there in the top left. It's got quite a few big ones. You'll see just above the 4 in the 24 feet of water is a really, really big one. And again, you can tell he's twice the size of the rest of the dots there. And we caught several good ones out of this as well. But this, if I remember correctly, this particular school, yes, because I lost like 2 crankbaits in those 2 stumps right there. This particular school, I caught several on a crankbait, and they totally shut down. I threw my jerky J, my trimmer head through there. I threw a regular swim bait. I threw the big mag spoon. I threw a ton of stuff. Once they shut down, I actually had to pick a drop shot back up. And I got my client to pick it up. He caught 3 in a row. I picked the mag spoon up and caught one every cast for about 10 minutes. Wow. So it's just, again, it's we could talk about it for days, but the most important part is to get this school fired up and keep them going. I mean, he was catching them as fast as he could get that drop shot in there. Now, he was catching little bitty ones, and he just, I tried to do it the other way around. He did not like throwing the mag spoons, just not comfortable for him. So he let me do it there to have a little fun for a change. But once we got that school reignited and fired up, they were just bonkers. I mean, it was nuts there for a few minutes.
This is a really important question, and I skipped over it earlier. I'm sorry, Jeremy. Like I said before, if you ever just got to have your question answered, use that super chat function, 99 cents. It'll highlight on the screen. I promise you I'll answer it. Any advice on settings in general for Lowrance side scan? I use is it palette number 9 amber?
No, it's 5.
Palette 5. That's what I use.
What is interesting, and what I found with doing several hundred electronic trips with different people, everyone sees their eyes see differently. So what looks good to me, color palette wise, does not necessarily mean the Baitman sees things very well. I mean, there's some times where I see a stump, which is very easy to see on side imaging, that a customer may not be able to see hardly at all. I changed the color palette from amber to blue, and it pops out, and he can see everything great. So the color palettes I prefer on the Lowrance. I prefer 5, 6, and 8. Those are the 3 that I use. And number 9 in soft bottom works really well, but you don't see very many in soft bottom, so I don't use that a ton. But the one of the most important things to touch on the side imaging is you'll notice in each one of these screens, at the top left and the top right, I'm running my side imaging at 50 feet. Now that's 50 feet to the left and 50 feet to the right. I'm covering 100 feet there. If the larger the range, the smaller objects get. And you can tell, and I've never had a customer, when we ride over the very first school, we see that particular trip, say, wow, those really stand out, and that's exactly what I expected bass to look like on the unit. They're very small in comparison to what people imagine them to look like. So you run this same image out to 70, 80, 90 feet, even 100 feet, those things are so small you can't always see them. And that's one big issue that a lot of people, misconception that people have.
Yeah, I've heard guys say, well, the best setting is 3 to 4 times with the deepest part you're scanning. And I'm just like, man, I can't even tell them when you're scanning and it's 80 foot out this way and that way.
Exactly.
I'll leave it on Lowrance, like you can do like 40 foot.
Yeah, 40 or 50. You know, when you're starting, you might want to go to 40 because they are a little bigger. But again, to kind of hit on that or reemphasize, once you get comfortable with, say, 50 feet, you need to stay on 50 feet. The only time I would ever change that is if I was not looking for fish and I was looking for cover, or maybe, I don't know, some deep reservoir. You might be deeper than 50. But again, with the size of an object changing based on the range, I don't like to jump that around. I want everything to be really consistent. Like I can tell you, those two stumps there are sticking anywhere from 4 to 6 feet off the bottom. And the reason I can tell you that is just from experience running side imaging at 50 feet and being able to see objects on the side imaging at summer pool, and then coming back and looking. I'm throwing a topwater around them in the fall, and in the winter. You know, when the water gets really low, I'll ride around and just look at objects. I've gotten a good size reference, and that's what you'll do over time. This is a great, just another quick, it's a wad of crappie there in a brush pile. You'll notice that brush pile is a fresh brush pile. It's got a lot of red in it. That thing has still got its leaves on it. Whatever, I don't know if that's might be a man-made Christmas tree. Could be I don't know. Whatever that is a really, really thick, bushy branch or brush pile. But you'll see the crappie again. Very common setup. They're suspended above it. The crappie are always going to relate vertically to each other, whereas the bass are going to relate horizontally. Something I found that was pretty interesting. There's actually a few bass, and the reason I took this screenshot, there's 2 bass on the left side of the brush pile and 2 bass on the right side of the brush pile. This school of crappie here was right basically in the middle of where a school of bass has been living for the last week or 10 days on Pickwick, and the bass have just been out of pressure.
This is in me and Jeff Defe's wheelhouse. When you start throwing these brush piles,
yeah, no, see, I'm out.
And so, and I'll just say today's example, we didn't whack them, but we did find some fish toward the end of the day around brush. And this big misconception is guys throwing brush piles, and brush pile fishing is an art form. And some of the guys, they fish the brush, and as soon as they come out of the brush pile, they reel it in.
Negative.
And if you knew how many fish we caught way out to the sides of those brush piles, almost to the boat, I would say 70% of them.
Yep, I'll be the first to tell you, I am not a brush pile fisherman. I would much prefer. A lot of that has to do with, basically every day I'm fishing, I'm doing an electronics trip, and we don't need to look at 2. You know, that's not our goal. But in riding around, I see 1 or 2 here and 3 there on stumps and on cover. Most of the time, it's this scenario where they're not on the piece of cover; they're around it somewhere. So you're exactly right. It's very important to fish your bait out. At least get it a good ways away from whatever the cover may be, stump, brush pile, whatever it is. Because oftentimes they're relating to the brush pile or the stump, but they're not in the piece of cover.
So I'm going to answer a few more questions here. That's the last screenshot we really got. And then I'm going to have to jump off here. And Jake's got to drive all the way back to Paris, and that's a haul.
Shoot, this is an early night. When I do my trips to Pickwick, it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock before I get home.
So Victor asks, and Victor's on here all the time, great dude. How helpful do you think side imaging is when fishing in a kayak? I actually think it's probably better than your down imaging.
It is. So, obviously side imaging is designed to be used at a forward constant speed. In saying that, Humminbird has done a great job. When you turn your chart speed down to like 2, it actually presents a fairly good picture. And I would actually choose a side imaging unit on my trolling motor or on a kayak before I would a 360 unit. I'm not a big fan of the 360 for various reasons, but I could see it being very, very useful.
Well, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up. If you guys like Jake being on here, let me know, because, man, dude, this guy knows swim baits, too. He's a big swim bait guy. And maybe we'll go into more just ledge fishing techniques and baits. But I thought I'd do something different with a screenshot and really breaking that down. And, guys, I thank you all, again, Saturday night, joining me here. I know many people are going to watch this tomorrow. It's got families, and hey, be with your family. I try to be with mine. I gotta go tame the beast in there here in a minute. But Jake, I appreciate you joining in. I've got the bait knowledge. You've got the actual how to catch fishing part down. So I really appreciate you coming on here. And we're gonna film some more videos and more than just live streams. We're gonna get down to Pickwick. I'm gonna quit building some windows for a little bit, and you just let me know what you want to see on here. Hey, Rod, I really appreciate that donation, man. His says, great info. Thanks, Jake, for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Awesome show, Baitman. I've learned so much from your channel. Thank you, buddy. Man, I appreciate that. Like I said, I'd love to do this for a living, but I can't right now, unfortunately. But you guys that support the channel, thank you so much. I mean, literally, I needed a water heater, and you guys came through and took care of me. And I gotta bring you some new baits, man. I was on Tackle Warehouse the other day. My YouTube money comes in next week. I believe I'm gonna drop some coin on some new baits to show you guys. I've got to have
some of those.
I might have to send this to Jake.
We've got to do that. Hey guys, real quick, again, appreciate y'all sticking with us. That was a little more lengthy, which we tend to do that when we get together, but a little more lengthy than what we anticipated. Appreciate y'all sticking around. If you've got any questions on your electronics or would be interested in a trip, we shot my email there at the top of the chat screen, but I'll also give you my cell phone number, 731-446-0445. I do a ton of troubleshooting. It can be somewhat difficult based on the problem that you're having, but I do the best that I can. But feel free to give me a call anytime. Again, the only time that I don't answer my phone is when I'm actually on a guide trip. Just leave me a voicemail, shoot me a text, and I'll get back to you just as soon as I get off the lake. But don't hesitate to give me a call. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have, and love to take a few of y'all down to Pickwick or out here on Kentucky Lake and get your electronics set up and show you what a few bass look like in person.
And if you are interested in buying a new bass boat, if you get that itch, Malone's Marine's taking care of me, and they've let me get in the new Vexus. Jake knows boats really, really well. And they carry Triton, Vexus.
We've got a new one coming here pretty quick, Camus, that I am really fired up about. The cool thing that I see, of course, I do these electronic trips out of the customer's boat, so I have virtually been in every homemade little rinky-dink rig to the top of the line, biggest, baddest boat out there. I know what every boat feels like. I know how they ride, how they perform. I am incredibly impressed with what Vexus came out with, and I am dying to get in that Camus to see what it's got.
So if you don't know what the Camus is, that is Earl Bentz's new boat. And I don't even know if I should say this.
I'm already getting phone calls.
But the Baitman is going to be the first guy on the web to bring a video from a Camus. Matter of fact, I might have the first live Instagram photo of it. So
it's coming very soon.
It's coming in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that. But yeah, it's coming like in the next few weeks.
I can't tell you where, but it's going to happen. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're getting out of here. I am dying of thirst. Thanks again, guys, so much. And we'll do it again.
Yep.